The young and the restless spoilers as the scandal unfolded. The fabric of trust that Kyle and Clare had painstakingly woven over the past months began to unravel in the most brutal of ways. Audra's carefully constructed trap, years in the making, lay bare before them all. The whispered invitations, the late-night messages, the veiled promise of a rekindled intimacy, everything had been a lie. In a dramatic crescendo that felt ripped from the darkest chapters of a soap opera, Audra stepped forward in a courtroom lit by harsh fluorescence and relentless camera flashes, her eyes swollen with the pretense of heartbreak. She accused Kyle of sexual assault, painting their encounter as a violent violation rather than an entrapment of her own design. The words hung in the air like a guillotine's blade, ready to sever Kyle's reputation and leave him bleeding in the public eye. The stunned spectators, both in the gallery and beyond the television screens, watched in horror as the once confident architect found himself shackled by the weight of a crime he did not, and could not, ever have committed. Kyle, still reeling from the shock of betrayal, stood before the judge in a tailored navy suit that now seemed absurdly out of place. His usually calm demeanor cracked as he recounted the night in question. How Audra had invited him into her dimly lit apartment under the pretense of rekindling an old spark, how the door clicked shut behind him, how every conspiratorial glance and every inch of closing distance had lured him into a web of deceit. He described how, moments later, he found himself accused of violence he had neither planned nor perpetrated. His voice, raw with anger and frustration, rang out in the courtroom. This was a trap. A vile, premeditated trap. He slammed his fist on the defense table, making pens and papers leap into the air. Gasps echoed through the room. The judge banged her gavel, demanding order, but the damage had been done. Kyle's plea for justice, nothing more than the truth, was drowned out by Audra's theatrical sobbing, her every tear calculated to elicit sympathy from an audience hungry for a scandal. Yet it was Audra's bombshell announcement that truly sent shockwaves through every relationship tethered to the case. She was pregnant. As the words escaped her trembling lips, the courtroom seemed to tilt, reality buckling under the weight of her declaration. She sobbed uncontrollably, clutching the edges of the witness stand as if it were a lifeline. The press, ever hungry for exclusives, scribbled furiously, already composing headlines about the child she claimed to carry. Audra's plea was simple yet devastating. Kyle must pay, both in soul and in material terms, for the suffering she had endured. She demanded compensation, demanding security for the life she alleged was a product of his alleged assault. Clubbing the air with one fist, she wailed about her ruined innocence, her stolen dreams, her shattered trust. The public and Clare watched, hearts pounding with conflicting emotions. Sympathy for Audra's apparent plight warred with the nagging sense that something about this tale was too convenient, too meticulously rehearsed. Clare, torn between loyalty to Kyle and compassion for a pregnant woman in distress, made the most agonizing decision of her life. She stepped away from the defense table, her eyes brimming with tears that mirrored Audra's but sprang from an entirely different well of emotion. In a voice that cracked like thunder, Clare announced that she could no longer stand by Kyle, not because she believed Audra's lies, but because she refused to let Audra's unborn child grow up fatherless. "I cannot allow a life to be born into chaos," Clare said, her words echoing ominously through the hushed courtroom. She clasped Kyle's hand for a fleeting moment, an electric touch that conveyed more than words ever could, then withdrew it, stepping back as if to shield herself from the fallout she knew would follow. Though her gesture was born of selfless love, it felt to Kyle like a final, bitter stab. He watched as the woman he cared for walked away, her silhouette framed by the courtroom's glass door, each step she took punctuating the widening chasm between them. But as Clare retreated into uncertainty, another figure stood ever present on the periphery, his face a mask of fury and protectiveness. Nate, Clare's longtime friend and confidant, had arrived midway through the hearing, having been summoned by Clare's panicked text. He strode in just in time to hear Audra's fateful announcement, and his reaction was instantaneous and fierce. His jaw clenched so tightly that a vein throbbed at his temple. When Kyle accused Audra of setting him up, Nate stormed forward, his anger no longer containable. "How dare you?" he spat at Kyle, voice echoing off the polished wood panels. Nate's eyes burned with the conviction that the man he had spent years trusting could commit such a heinous crime. His loyalty to Clare, and his own sense of justice twisted by the narrative he had just witnessed, left no room for doubt or nuance. The irony was cruel, for Nate's righteous indignation only added to Kyle's isolation, cementing a public perception that he was guilty until proven innocent. Behind the scenes, alliances shifted like sand in a storm. Audra's lawyer, a sharp-tongued litigator known for turning the courtroom into a theater of cruelty, pounded her fist on the table and demanded immediate provisional support for her client. She painted Audra as a vulnerable victim in dire need of financial security, using her impending motherhood as a weapon. In contrast, Kyle's defense attorney, usually calm and composed, now appeared strained, forced into a delicate dance of betting on Clare's eventual return without alienating the jury with bitter attacks on a pregnant woman. Outside, the paparazzi circled like vultures, capturing every tear, every glare, every sign of collapsing resolve. Social media exploded, with hashtags like #JusticeForAudra trending alongside #KyleIsInnocent, each side gathering fervent supporters in a digital tug-of-war that threatened to pull reality apart at its seams. In the private realms of their lives, the emotional toll was even more severe. Kyle retreated into a storm of self-doubt and rage, replaying that night over and over in his mind with the obsessive precision of a man desperate to prove the impossible, that he had not violated Audra, that he had been ensnared by a woman he once trusted. Each memory felt tainted by her betrayal, morphing into a grotesque distortion of events. When he eventually gained a moment of solitude, he stared at the marriage certificate he and Clare had signed, the months of tenderness it represented now overshadowed by betrayal and despair. He wondered how love could twist into such pain, how desires so genuine could be manipulated into evidence of violence. Meanwhile, Clare wrestled with a guilt so profound it threatened to suffocate her. Every time she saw Audra's tear-streaked face, she questioned her own motives. Had she abandoned Kyle out of righteousness, or out of fear that the stigma would stain the child she might one day bear? Her love for Kyle warred with her maternal instinct to protect an innocent life, even if that child was the fruit of a lie. Each night, she lay awake in the grand but empty bedroom they once shared, haunted by the sound of Audra's sobs, the shrill demands for justice that felt like they were being drilled into Clare's skull by a merciless judge. And all the while, Audra reveled in her triumph. In private, she paced her apartment, running her hand over the faint curve of her belly with a twisted sense of victory. Every tear she shed in public, every howl of anguish she released in that courtroom, was part of her grand design to dismantle Kyle's life. She fantasized about the settlement she would soon extract, about the child who would bear Kyle's name yet know nothing of his love. She told herself she was a martyr, that the world would one day understand the depth of her suffering. But in the darkest corners of her mind, a flicker of doubt remained. What if the lie unraveled? What if Kyle, Nate, or, heaven forbid, Clare found the shred of truth that could expose her scheme? The sweet triumph of the moment could sour overnight, and Audra felt an unnameable chill at the thought that justice, however warped, might yet have the final word. Outside the courthouse, the city's pulse raced on. Headlines plastered in neon lights and digital banners across the skyline announced the drama in bold type. Pregnancy adds twist to high-profile assault case, screamed one tabloid. Beloved architect or accused rapist, queried another. The municipal gossip mills ground ceaselessly, turning the case into water-cooler chatter, dinner table debate, and the staple of every morning radio segment. The stakes, once confined to a handful of lives, had become a public obsession, a morality play in which every citizen felt qualified to pass judgment. In bars and cafes, patrons leaned in to whisper theories. On social media, strangers hurled invective at Kyle and Audra by turns. In family living rooms, parents hushed their children as the latest teaser rolled out on the talk shows. The spectacle was complete, a private tragedy transformed into an all-consuming national drama. Yet even as the world clamored for resolution, the heart of the matter remained disturbingly simple: a woman's lie, a man's shattered innocence, and a child whose very existence had become a weapon in a bitter war. Clare's departure, Nate's scorn, Audra's tears, and Kyle's rage, all these elements coalesced into a story that transcended the boundaries of courtroom procedure and public opinion. It was, at its core, a testament to how quickly human bonds can be twisted, how fragile the line is between love and betrayal, trust and deception. And as the trial marched on, the question that loomed larger than any legal precedent or sensational headline was this: in a world that thrives on drama, who would ultimately have the final say, the one who speaks the loudest, the one who weeps the hardest, or the one who clings to the truth when every eye is turned elsewhere? Only time, and the unflinching eye of justice, would tell. In the hushed opulence of Newman Enterprises' private boardroom, Victor Newman allowed himself a deep, resonant chuckle that vibrated through the polished mahogany walls. The sound, equal parts triumph and amusement, echoed the satisfaction he felt watching Audra's machinations unfold exactly as planned. From the moment she'd first whispered her false accusations, pregnant belly and all, the younger woman had proven herself a masterful player in a game of reputations and fortunes. Victor regarded her not with pity but with pride. Here was an interloper cunning enough to ensnare Kyle Abbott, one of his greatest rivals' heirs, in a scandal that threatened to shatter the very foundations of the Abbott legacy. Yet, even as he savored this victory, a single question lingered at the back of his mind. Was Audra truly with child, or merely weaving yet another layer of deceit? Audra herself oscillated between confidence and calculated vulnerability. Behind her eyes flickered the gleam of ambition. If she truly carried Kyle's child, then the power she held over him and the Abbott fortune would be absolute. She fantasized about securing Jack Abbott's reluctant acceptance of paternal responsibility, forcing him, through legal pressure or social shame, to guarantee her financial security. A sizable share of the Jabot Cosmetics empire could be hers, perhaps even a stake large enough to challenge Victor himself. And yet, Audra recognized that reality demanded more than lofty dreams. A single ultrasound image, presented at precisely the right moment, would silence her detractors and compel Jack, and by extension, the entire Abbott clan, to bend to her will. But Clare, ever vigilant and fiercely protective of both Kyle's innocence and the truth, had grown suspicious. Within days of Audra's public performance, Clare had quietly begun to investigate the legitimacy of the ultrasound clinics Audra claimed to have visited. She discovered that, for the right price, any unscrupulous technician could produce a counterfeit sonogram, an image indistinguishable from a genuine scan. More troubling still, Clare learned that Audra had never undergone a standard prenatal consultation. Instead, she'd relied on a fringe operation known for its willingness to fabricate results. The evidence was damning, but Clare knew that exposing it would require surgical precision. One misstep, and the cascade of sympathy for Audra's ordeal might forever bury the truth. As Clare prepared her dossier of forged clinic receipts and expert testimony, Kyle found himself adrift in a sea of uncertainty. His phone remained silent, each ring he expected from Clare replaced by interminable silence that gnawed at him. He scrolled through their last text exchange, Clare's worried words accusing him of ignoring her instincts, urging him to step back until the full facts could be ascertained. At the time, Kyle had brushed them aside, convinced that Clare simply did not appreciate the nuances of canny litigation and the court of public opinion. In retrospect, every cautionary note had been a lifeline he'd cast aside. Now, stranded in the middle of a high-stakes legal ambush, he recognized too late the wisdom of her warnings. Meanwhile, Jack Abbott was beginning to sense the strategic advantage Audra offered. Whispers had reached his boardroom, accusations that he, not Kyle, was the true father of the child. He bristled at the notion, yet he could not dismiss outright the specter of a paternity suit that might divide his siblings and dilute his control of their shared inheritance. Lawyers, alerted by Audra's counsel, positioned her case to leverage maximum pressure, provisional support payments, public censure of Kyle, and hints of a settled quiet agreement. Jack, ordinarily unshakable, now found himself weighing the cost of a protracted legal battle against the price of conceding just enough to keep the family, and their public image, intact. Victor, ever the opportunist, observed these developments with keen interest. He had orchestrated much of the conflict, feeding Audra insider knowledge of his adversary's weaknesses, ensuring her every statement would reverberate through the media channels he still partially controlled. Yet even he could not predict whether Audra's story would withstand the scrutiny of Clare's impending revelations. His laughter had been born of certainty, but in the quiet moments after the court adjourned each day, he too wondered, would Audra's grand design collapse under the weight of its own artifice? As the trial date approached, alliances shifted unpredictably. Nate, Clare's steadfast friend and confidant, took up her cause with unyielding vigor. He confronted Jack in a private meeting, his anger barely contained, as he demanded the truth be unearthed before any further payments were made. Jack, torn between protecting the Abbott name and avoiding a courtroom spectacle that could foul his reputation, found himself nodding to Nate's reasoning. Meanwhile, Kyle, buoyed by Nate's resolve and Clare's covert assurance that proof of Audra's deception was within reach, mustered the courage to stand his ground. No longer the placid architect ensnared by circumstance, he transformed into a man determined to reclaim his name, even if the path required public exposure of Audra's deepest lies. On the eve of Clare's scheduled testimony, the tension was palpable. Audra, her composure maintained only by the defensive layer of desperation, practiced her public outcry in a mirror, rehearsing tears that might resonate with a jury still divided in sympathy. Victor, seated in the front row of the makeshift courtroom Clare had assembled for their showdown, allowed himself one final sardonic smile. He anticipated the moment when Clare would produce the falsified clinic documents, when Audra's perfectly manicured facade would crumble, and when Kyle's exoneration would mark not only a personal triumph but a strategic victory that would realign the power dynamics between Newman and Abbott once more. Yet, amid all applauding and counterplotting, one truth remained unwavering. In the cruel theater of wealth, ambition, and scandal, every player risked becoming a casualty of their own schemes. If Clare succeeded, Audra's fate would be sealed, and Kyle would emerge restored. But if Audra's act held firm, if Jack, overcome by the fear of scandal, defaulted to pay her price, then the Abbotts might find themselves indebted not only financially but irrevocably entangled in a web they could neither control nor escape. And Victor, whose laughter had once signified unassailable confidence, might discover that even the greatest puppet master must sometimes face the unpredictable twists of a drama more vivid and more perilous than any he could have orchestrated.